Everyone quotes the 7-Eleven 4 rule, but nobody explains where it actually came from. Nobody explains what it actually means. You've probably heard someone throw this rule around, maybe in a sales training, maybe in a marketing meeting. Someone said it with total confidence. People drop it into pitches, they repeat it on stages, they quote it in posts. 7 hours, 11 touch points, 4 platforms. Say those numbers enough times and they start to sound like law. But go looking for where they actually came from, and the trail runs cold fast. Nobody agrees on the source. Nobody agrees on what the numbers are supposed to actually mean. And nobody has even checked whether the rule is even true anymore. This is the explanation that you should have gotten the first time you heard it. If you run a business, if you're a founder, or if you sell professional services, this video is for you. Because this rule already decides whether a buyer trusts you enough to choose you, whether you know it or not. By the end of this video, you'll know where the 7-Eleven 4 rule came from, you'll know what the research behind it actually says, and you'll know what each number means. You'll understand where people misunderstand it, and I'll give you a framework you could use to make the 7-Eleven 4 rule work for your business. I spent 27 years in B2B marketing watching how buyers actually decide. I traced this rule back to its source instead of simply repeating the numbers like everybody else. So let's start with the part that almost everybody gets wrong. One thing before we go further, the 7-Eleven 4 rule is not mine. It's not the invention of a single marketing guru, even though plenty of them present it that way. It traces back to Google. Understanding that matters because the rule is just a summary of how Google observed how people are buying online. Back in 2011, Google published a major study on how the internet changed the way people buy. They called the central idea the zero moment of truth. The old buying model had two key moments: the moment you saw a product on the shelf and the moment that you took it home and used it. Google noticed there was now a new moment before both of those, a moment that had quietly become the most important one. That moment happens when someone realizes they have a problem and they turn to the internet to research it, privately, on their own, long before they speak to a salesperson. Google called this the zero moment of truth because it happens before the traditional buying journey officially begins. Their research showed that buying decisions were being made during this private research stage. As Google continued studying this behavior, one pattern kept appearing: how much contact a buyer typically needs with a brand before trusting it enough to take action. That pattern eventually became summarized into what we now call the 7-Eleven 4 rule. You already heard the numbers at the start of this video. Here's what's actually behind them: roughly 7 hours of engagement across 11 touch points on 4 different platforms. Now, here's an important caveat. Google never published the official document saying, here's the 7-Eleven 4 rule. The numbers come from Google's research into buyer behavior, but the simple 7-Eleven 4 rule packaging was an easy way for marketers to remember the findings. That's exactly why it's so difficult to find a definitive explanation. There's no single official Google page that lays it all out. So when you talk about this rule, here's the honest way to frame it. It comes from Google's research on how people buy, especially the zero moment of truth. The specific numbers are a widely accepted summary of that research. Now that you know where the numbers came from, let's look beneath the numbers themselves, because once you understand the buyer behavior underneath them, everything else starts to make sense. Before we break down each number, I want you to understand the behavior behind them, because the numbers only make sense once you understand what buyers are actually doing. Modern buyers are cautious. They're skeptical. This is not magic math. Think about the last meaningful purchase you actually made. Not a pack of gum, something expensive, something risky. One ad was never enough. So you researched, you watched videos, you read articles, you compared options, then you asked around, and then you walked away. Later, you came back, you visited the same company again in more than one place. Only then did you finally feel comfortable enough to say yes. And that's what the 7-Eleven 4 rule is measuring. Modern buyers don't trust quickly. They build trust gradually through repeated contact across time, across multiple places. The numbers simply estimate how much contact that usually takes. Why? Because buyers today are flooded with marketing. Much of it is automated, much of it is exaggerated, so they protect themselves. They demand more proof, more familiarity, more consistency before they commit. The 7-11-4 rule is really measuring how much trust building is required to overcome that skepticism. Keep that thought in your mind. Every number measures trust. 7 hours measures the depth. 11 touch points measures the repetition. 4 platforms measures the breadth. 3 different ways of measuring the same thing. Now that you understand the behavior underneath the numbers, let's break down each one individually. We'll start with the first number, 7 hours. 7 hours. The rule says a buyer needs roughly 7 hours of engagement before they trust you enough to buy. Let that sink in. Not 7 seconds, not 7 minutes, 7 hours. That does not mean 7 hours in one sitting. Nobody binge watches your content for 7 hours straight. It means 7 hours accumulated over time. A 10-minute video here, a 5-minute article there, a podcast during a commute, an email over a morning coffee, all of that adding together over days, weeks, or sometimes even months. There's a reason that number is so high. Trust is built by spending time with someone, not by simply seeing them. A logo impression builds almost no trust. A half-second scroll past your ad builds almost no trust. Real trust comes from spending attention on your thinking, your expertise, your perspective, and that takes hours, not seconds. Trust is built by spending time with someone, not by simply seeing them. And this is where businesses fail and don't notice. They optimize for exposure. Instead of attention, they want thousands of impressions. But that's only a few minutes of actual engagement. They're measuring the wrong thing. So what builds hours? Long-form content, useful videos, detailed articles, podcasts, content people actually spend time with. Long-form content compresses trust. Instead of earning a tiny piece of attention, it earns deep attention. One great long-form video can contribute more towards those 7 hours than 100 forgettable posts. The takeaway is simple. Stop asking how many people saw my marketing and start asking how many hours of attention am I earning from one buyer? Because attention builds trust. Exposure alone doesn't. Now that we've covered depth, let's look at the second number, 11 touch points. The second number is 11. Those 7 hours do not happen in one block. They happen across roughly 11 separate touch points, 11 distinct moments where the buyer runs into you. 7 is about depth, 11 is about repetition. Why does repetition matter so much? Because of how the human memory and trust work. One encounter, no matter how good, fades fast. But when you run into someone again and again and again, something shifts. They become familiar, and familiarity feels safe. That safety is what allows a cautious buyer to act. 11 touch points is roughly how many repeat encounters it takes to move from stranger to a familiar presence. Think of it like getting to know a person. The first time you meet someone, you barely notice them. By the third or fourth time, you start to recognize them. By the 10th or 11th time, they feel familiar to you. Brands work the same way in the buyer's mind. 11 touch points moves you from forgettable stranger to familiar option. And familiar options make the short list. Now here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They treat every touch point as a separate, disconnected effort. A random post once a week, an unrelated ad the next week, an email that has nothing to do with either. The buyer technically gets multiple touch points, but because they're disconnected, they don't reinforce each other. It's like meeting someone 11 times, but they're wearing 11 different disguises. The familiarity never builds because nothing connects. The fix is to connect each touch point. Your 11 touch points should reinforce each other. They should return to the same themes and the same point of view, the same core message, so each encounter strengthens the last. Touch point 3 should make the buyer think, oh, It's that person again, the one who talks about this. That is what builds familiarity. Connected repetition, not random repetition. And there's a practical shortcut you could do here. You don't have to invent 7 separate ideas. You take one substantial piece of thinking, one of those long form pieces that builds hours, and you break it up into smaller pieces. A long form video becomes short clips, individual posts, email segments, quotes, carousels. Each one becomes a separate touch point, but all of them are connected to the same core idea. One piece of deep work can create 8, 10, or even 12 connected touch points. That's how you reach 11 without doing 11 times the work. So here's the takeaway for the number 11. Trust needs repeated, connected contact. Show up in the buyer's world many times and make sure each time reinforces the others. That's how repetition builds familiarity instead of noise. Now that we've covered repetition, let's move to the final number, the 4 platforms. Most businesses pick one platform and they pour everything into it. It feels efficient, but it's quietly the reason they plateau. The third number in the rule is 4, and it exists to correct exactly that instinct. Those 11 touch points should happen across at least 4 different platforms or channels. Your website, social media, email, video, search, wherever your buyers spend their attention. If 7 is about depth and 11 is about repetition, 4 is about breadth. Being present in multiple corners of the buyer's world. Why does spreading across 4 platforms matter? There are 2 reasons, and both are powerful. The first is reach. Your buyers are not all in one place. They spend most of their time in their inboxes. Some live on one social platform. Some prefer another. Some discover everything through search. If you're only present on one platform, you simply never reach the buyers who spend time somewhere else. 4 platforms means you meet buyers wherever they already are. The second reason is more important. Showing across multiple platforms makes your business feel established. It makes it feel legitimate. When a buyer sees you on social, then they find you in search, then they receive your emails, then they watch your videos, something changes in their mind. You begin to feel like you're everywhere. Businesses that seem to be everywhere feel larger. They feel more credible. They feel more trustworthy, and they feel more permanent. That's the difference between a business that feels established and one that feels like they could disappear tomorrow. There's another insight hidden inside that number. Because Google could observe buyers moving between search, videos, browsing, and other channels, they saw that buyers naturally cross platforms when researching. People don't make buying decisions in one place. They search, they watch, they read, they compare. They check reviews, and then they visit social media. The 4 platform guideline reflects how buyers actually move through the buying journey. You spread across platforms because buyers naturally do. Now, here's the mistake that businesses make. They put all their eggs into one basket. They go all in on one platform. Maybe it's Instagram, maybe YouTube, maybe LinkedIn. It works for a while, but it's fragile because you become dependent on one algorithm, one company, one source of traffic, and you only reach people who spend time there. The opposite mistake is trying to be everywhere. 12 platforms, completely overwhelmed, producing shallow content everywhere. The 4 platforms are the middle ground. Enough breadth to feel established, enough reach to meet buyers where they are without spreading yourself so thin that nothing is done well. And once again, the practical answer is not creating completely different content for each platform. You take the touch points you already created and distribute them. Your long form video becomes the clips for social, an article for your website, an email for your list, and searchable content on Google. One engine, 4 platforms. That's how being everywhere becomes sustainable instead of exhausting. So here's the takeaway for the number 4. Show up wherever your buyers already spend their time. Not just to reach more people, but to build the feeling that you're already established, credible, and the trusted choice. Now that we've explored each number individually, let's put all 3 together because this is where the real power of the 7-11-4 rule becomes clear. Here is why almost every business that quotes this rule still fails to use it. They know the three numbers, they just never see the one thing hiding underneath them. Now let's put the three numbers back together because the real meaning is found in the combination. 7 hours of engagement across 11 touch points on 4 different platforms. Depth, repetition, and breadth. 3 sides of the same thing. The trust a modern buyer needs before they choose you. When you see it all in one picture, the message becomes impossible to ignore. The trust is built through real attention, repeated many times across multiple platforms over an extended period. Never in a single moment, never in a single piece of content, and never in a single place. That's the real lesson of the 7-Eleven 4 rule. The numbers are simply a memorable way to describe how much presence, trust is actually required. Now you can see why so much marketing fails. A single ad gives the buyer a few seconds. One touch point, one platform. A single landing page does the same. An occasional social post does the same thing as well. Each of these represents only a tiny fraction of the 7 hours, the 11 touch points, and the 4 platforms that trust requires. Businesses are trying to earn trust with the 1 to 2% of the contact that it actually takes. Then they wonder why buyers don't convert. The business simply never came close to that trust threshold. And here's a reframe that I want you to remember. The 7-Eleven 4 rule is not a marketing tactic, it's a trust threshold. It tells you roughly how much engagement a buyer needs before enough trust exists to buy. If you fall short of that threshold, no closing technique can save you. The trust simply is not there. But once you cross that threshold, the sale becomes dramatically easier because the trust was built long before you ever asked for anything. This explains something you've probably experienced. Sometimes a buyer shows up already convinced. They're ready to move forward, almost no selling is required. Other times, every conversation feels like an uphill battle. The buyer is skeptical, they hesitate, they question everything. The difference usually is not the buyer. It's whether they crossed the 7-Eleven 4 threshold before they started the conversation with you. The easy buyer already accumulated the 7 hours, 11 touch points, and 4 platforms. The difficult buyer did not. And now you're trying to compress an entire trust building process into one call. And that almost never works. This entire process, the one happening before you ever speak to a buyer, that's what I call the silent race. It's a competition for trust that happens completely before the first contact. And the businesses that win that race usually win the deal before the first conversation even begins. Now that we've uncovered what the rule really means, let's clear up the biggest misunderstanding that keeps businesses from applying it correctly. Let's clear up the way people get this rule wrong, because misunderstanding it leads to poor decisions. The first mistake, people treat the numbers as exact, almost magical, but they're not. A buyer does not refuse to buy at 6 hours and 59 minutes, then suddenly converts 1 minute later. These aren't laws of physics, they're rough averages based on research. The numbers exist to communicate one simple truth. Trust requires much more contact than most businesses realize. Don't obsess on hitting exactly 7. Focus on the direction the numbers point. The second mistake, people think it's all about volume. And it's not. The rule is not telling you to flood the internet with content. 7 hours of useless content builds no trust. 11 irrelevant touch points builds no familiarity. Quality matters here. The numbers assume the buyer is spending time with content that's genuinely valuable. Content worth their attention. Worthless content doesn't move them towards the trust threshold, no matter how much of it you produce. You can't build trust with content that nobody values. The third mistake, people think every touch point and every platform is a separate job, and it's not. The businesses that succeed with this rule build one connected system, not 11 disconnected campaigns across 4 disconnected platforms. If you treat the 7-Eleven 4 rule as a giant to-do list, you're gonna burn yourself out. Instead, one piece of deep content that builds the hours. That same content creates multiple touch points, and those touch points are distributed across multiple platforms. One engine, not a dozen of unrelated efforts. The fourth mistake, people try to fake engagement. They hear 7 hours and immediately start looking for ways to inflate watch time. or manufacture extra touches. That completely misses the point. The 7 hours represent real trust being built. You earn it by creating something valuable enough that buyers are willing to spend time with you. The hours are the result of trust building, not the substitute for it. You can't fake trust, you need to earn it. Avoid these four mistakes, and the 7-11-4 rule becomes what it's meant to be, a guiding principle, one that reminds you that trust requires far more contact, repeated more often, across multiple places that most businesses ever provide. And that means you need a real system, not random marketing. So, what does this look like in your business? Let's make this practical. Let me bring this back to your business. Whatever you sell, especially if it's expensive, complex, or requires trust, your buyers are already going to go through this process, whether you're part of it or not. They're researching privately, they're building trust gradually, and they're moving from platform to platform. They're accumulating hours of attention all before they ever make contact with you. The only question is this: are you part of the journey or are you absent from it? If you're absent, here's what happens. The buyer still accumulates 7 hours. They still experience 11 touch points, and they still move across 4 platforms. They simply do it with your competitors because your competitors were there and you were not. By the time the buyer is ready to act, they've already crossed that trust threshold with someone else. You were never in the running. You can lose deals that you never knew existed because the entire trust building process happened without you. I call this invisible loss. You didn't lose the sale, you never had the opportunity to compete for it. Now let's look at the opposite. If you're consistently present, the buyer accumulates those hours with you. Then they encounter your ideas again and again across multiple platforms. You become familiar, you become trusted, you become the safe choice. By the time they reach out, you're no longer one option among many. You're the obvious choice, and the sale is already half won. That's why the 7-11-4 rule is not just an interesting marketing concept. It describes the exact game being played in every competitive market every single day. Your buyers have a trust threshold. They're going to cross it with someone. The only question is, will that someone be you? Knowing the threshold exists is one thing. Actually delivering 7 hours of engagement across 11 touch points on 4 platforms consistently without it consuming your entire life, that's something completely different. That requires a system, and most businesses don't have one. That's why they've never reached that threshold. In the next video, I'll show you exactly how to build one. Most marketing fails because it falls short of that trust threshold. One touch point, one platform, a few seconds of attention. Then businesses wonder why buyers don't convert. Buyers are behaving normally. The marketing simply never built enough trust. The only reliable way to cross the trust threshold is to stop relying on disconnected, one-off marketing and start building a connected system that intentionally creates depth, repetition, and breadth. That system is what this next video is about. It sits at the heart of everything I teach, because here is the truth the 7-11-4 rule points towards. The most visible, the most valuable, the most trusted business in the market wins. The 7-11-4 rule is just one part of a much larger system. I call this system the conversion ecosystem. It was built specifically to help businesses consistently reach that trust threshold, not by accident, but by design. That trust threshold I talked about throughout this video has another name. I call it conversation ownership. It's the point where your buyers stop learning from everybody else and start learning from you. By the time they contact you, the decision has already been made. The conversion ecosystem makes that possible. It combines an awareness system, a capture system, a nurture system, and a long-form content system. All of this is designed to systematically guide your buyers towards that trust threshold. If this video gave you a clear understanding of how trust is actually built, the next video will show you exactly how to implement the 7-11-4 rule inside your business. Go watch the next one, because now you know something that most people who quote this rule never understand. It was never just a marketing tactic. It was always been the price of trust. Your buyers are already paying that price to someone. Make sure that someone is you.